So maybe a bit of background is in order then about this. So I came up with this talk last year in the middle of what was a relatively new and novel pandemic, and then decided to actually write it and sort of make it real, in a sense, I suppose, later that year. So I originally tried to deliver it, or wanted to deliver it at the start of this year in person at Monash University in a lecture hall, but that didn't end up happening for reasons I'm sure that we can all guess at. And I then wanted to try and do it again in August at Monash University in person in a lecture hall, but again, that didn't work, didn't turn out. So here we are now in October, and Zoom has come to the rescue, as I think it probably very often has in this past year. So I wrote this in part because I thought that our happiness and our habits are two factors of our realities that have been drastically altered by the pandemic. And so I thought that it might be worth trying to shine a light on them in some sense. And now we are hopefully at what is the tail end of the pandemic in Australia, hopefully, which may not be the case, but regardless, it's still these two topics still seem just as important and worth discussing now as they did last year, back then, previously, and are worth talking about in general, regardless of context or social global circumstance. So I suppose let's just get right into it then. So beginning with happiness. Happiness is a fickle and difficult state of being. It is something that we all tend to strive for, yet often find so elusive. The times that we do have it, it can be fleeting, or not quite what we were hoping for, leaving us feeling disheartened and empty. Part of the trickiness with happiness is that it comes hand in hand with unhappiness, or at least the risk of unhappiness. For example, simply noting an absence of happiness after a period of being noticeably happy can itself be cause enough for unhappiness, or at least a prolonged sense of unhappiness. Now, by the point of young adulthood, I think that most of us have got a pretty good grip on the idea that the road to happiness is by no means straightforward, with inevitable obstacles and also sometimes unexpected safe zones. So with these thoughts in mind, it seems worth exploring a little further. And I should say, I suppose, that I don't think I'm going to try to talk about happiness in a sort of conventional tips and tricks, gotcha, here you go kind of sense, but more so just to point at certain things that you may not have thought of, or that might sound a little bit counterintuitive even, that can positively affect your happiness and the outcomes of happiness. So again, by the point of young adulthood, I think that most of us have developed at least a pretty good idea about, if not, and into maturity beyond that, a pretty good idea about, if not so much what will make us happy, because that's a bit of a harder question, but we've got a better idea about what won't make us happy. We think we've got a pretty good grip on what we think will not make us happy. For example, I'm sure that many of us would rather not have a conversation with the person behind the counter or the bar at a cafe or at a restaurant, or with the stranger on the bus next to you, or at a random individual at a party, if you didn't have to. You know, why bother doing that, you might tell yourself. It could very well just be awkward or uncomfortable and just not end well. And you know, maybe you think that you're introverted. And so that kind of thing just isn't you, and you just know that there's no point participating in those kinds of interactions. Like, why? It doesn't even cross your mind. But studies that have come out of the lab of Laurie Santos, a psychologist of happiness at Yale University, suggest that these fleeting connections, because that's what they're fleeting connections, can actually be very powerful for well-being, regardless of how introverted you might think you are, or whether or not you think that those kinds of things are you. So let's consider a more specific example. So let's say you've just ordered an Uber, and the Uber arrives, and you go to hop into that Uber, and upon doing so, you have a few thoughts. And one of those thoughts, those initial thoughts, is often something along the lines of, am I going to have to talk to this Uber driver? And then your second thought following that is usually something like, I don't think so. I'd probably rather not do that if I didn't have to. And another thought lying in the background is probably that you don't want to become that stereotype, be that person that asks that ill-fated question of, have you had a busy night? Which we're all guilty of and have done in the past, to our regret. Anyway, so you hop into the Uber, and very often a conversation will be started between you and that driver, sometimes with you participating quite enthusiastically. And there can be plenty of reasons for why that might be the case. Maybe the Uber driver is interesting to you in some sense, more so than in a way that overcomes your initial doubts. And an Uber driver can also be someone that is disconnected from your normal social circumstance, and is very little consequence attached to a conversation in that sense, which can be quite freeing and uplifting. And so eventually you arrive at your destination feeling surprisingly good about the past 10 minutes, completely opposed to your initial apprehension. And you might not think of it this way at the time, but by engaging in that interaction, you have just subliminally, for the most part, generated some small positive feedback through a new successful social connection, which is, in a sense, reinforced to yourself your own ability to be socially cohesive whilst being stimulated by another personality and while stimulating another personality. And we like that. We like it. What that indicates to us is that we have been capable of being successfully social, and we are inherently social creatures. And so we like it when it seems as if we are capable of being successfully social. So moving on from that and talking about time and attention now. So many of us, I think, feel as if we have such little time to properly live our lives outside of work or schooling or universities or other such duties, when the truth is that we actually have more leisure time available to us now than at any other point in history. Try being a subsistence farmer and see how much leisure time you get then. The catch with this is that time is passed out and appears to exist in a kind of passed out into short bursts, and exists as a kind of time confetti that we can't seem to properly utilize for things that are truly productive or meaningful. And those are the things that, when we reflect back on how we've spent our time, we think of as being fulfilling and rewarding, and fills us with a sense of contentment. There's no regret there in that sense, like there might be with other things. Or at least there's less regret or less anxiety, worry. Now, let's say that you've got 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour free here or there between this or that task or this or that thing, or after this or that thing. So you think, I can't really do anything properly here, and maybe I'm a bit tired or exhausted or whatever it is, and so I'll just I'll jump on my phone and I'll scroll social media. I'll go on Facebook. I'll go on Snapchat. I'll go on Instagram. I'll go on Twitter. I'll go on Reddit. I'll check my emails. I'll check my messages. I'll watch a YouTube video. And before you know it, you've accumulated hours of time acting in this manner throughout the week, and sometimes even throughout the day. And this is particularly prominent in university, I think, if there's any university students still out there here now, where it's very easy to spread one's work out across an entire day alongside a fair portion of procrastination when you probably could have achieved the same thing in a dedicated 3 to 4 hour block, which would have then opened up a longer time frame in which you could have properly utilized your leisure time that's there free now in a manner that allows for the development of things like habits and hobbies, which are those things that then fill us with, which we positively associate with, and we feel good about when we think back on them and when we're doing them in the moment. They give us something that lasts beyond that moment. And this isn't the same as just cramming the night before and condensing your work in that sense, because the time leading up to that point isn't particularly free or leisurely. It's burdened by the weight of you knowing that you should be doing something that you are not, which I'm sure strikes true to many of us here. And this, what I just said there is not confined to a university context in terms of how you spread work out and then versus condensing it and then having a longer time frame available for leisure time, for habits and hobbies and whatnot. That is true for all kinds of things, all kinds of activities, whatever it is. And so I think this idea comes into play more, this idea of our attention being consumed at any given moment by, or giving our attention to things at any given moment that are not particularly fulfilling or ultimately sustaining or gratifying in that sense. We do not allocate our attention effectively and our time in that sense. So let's say that you have a few minutes free here or there. You're on the bus or you're walking somewhere or you're just between this or that task. It's in the moment, in that moment of small spaces between things. And so you think, I'll check my phone. I'll browse social media. I'll check my messages, social networks, internet, YouTube, whatever it is, within those small spaces between things. And in doing so, instantly subvert your attention away from whatever it is that is going on around you, or whoever it is that is with you around you, that you could be paying attention to and immersing in that moment and immersing yourself in. And you might think, well, but I'm not doing anything, and that's not actually doing anything, and I don't want to be bored, and I've such a low tolerance for boredom, and I'm so used to my attention being consumed by all of these things, to which, you might say, it is in fact possible to connect to the moment for no particular reason and to be rewarded for it. There is ample opportunity at any given moment to simply take a deep breath and to just let go of whatever it is that you're running over in your mind, that you're thinking about, that's got the cogs spinning in a sense, that is in that moment not necessary and ultimately a little aimless or pointless, or that you're doing, that that attention that you're giving to these external devices, to just let go of all of those things and just to simply appreciate the simple fact of awareness and experience and connect with whatever it is that is going on around you. Appreciate everything that is going on around you. Look for it if you have to. Appreciate the small beauty of, a ray of sunshine, or the crisp sensation of a cool breeze, or the beauty of the artwork, or just whatever it is that's around you in that sense. Is my mic muted?
All good.
Okay, something's going on with someone there then. You've interrupted me, my rant. So just appreciate whatever it is that's going on around you in that sense, and search for it if you have to. Just connect with that moment, and again, whoever it is that's going on around you, whoever it is that is with you, that you may in fact not be paying as much attention to as would ultimately be a good thing. Appreciate the fact that in that moment you can experience these things and you don't have to think beyond them. This is no small thing, being able to connect to the moment and appreciate the simple fact of awareness. So often we hold our happiness hostage to future states and scenarios, telling ourselves that once we have this job or those grades or that relationship or this or that thing, then we can and will be happy. And maybe that is true to an extent. On average, for a little time at least, once you have achieved those things, then you may be a little happier. But the question there is if you can't appreciate the present as it is, how can you be so sure that you're going to know how to appreciate those future states and scenarios once you've achieved them? It's not necessarily a given that you will. And by that same token, if you can appreciate the present when the present is less than ideal, imagine the joy you'll be capable of experiencing when it is. It's important that we do not overvalue what we don't have whilst undervaluing what we do have. And so to finish talking about happiness, I'm going to go over two elements that I think are very pertinent to the topic and the idea, and that I'm sure we're all familiar with to some extent. And those things are gratitude and framing. So let's start with framing. So framing or reframing is as simple as casting a different light on a perception that you have of something, whether it be a physical thing, something that you have to do, or something that you have done, or something that has happened to you in the past, a past experience or thought, or whatever it is. And it is a process that Laurie Santos, the psychologist that I referenced earlier, has witnessed having a substantial effect on her patients' self-reflected levels of well-being. So framing or reframing is a simple, let's say, I'm sure at some point we've all thought back on an experience or something that's happened to us that we've had and thought, you know what, I'm not going to regret that thing because actually it taught me some valuable lessons, and maybe I wouldn't be where I am now, or I wouldn't be as well off as I am now without that thing. And just like that, you have effectively flicked a little switch. You've cleared the scar tissue from that memory of that memory within your mind. There's no longer that little wound there. And just like that, you have what was once negatively associated is now positively associated, or at the very least is no longer negatively associated. And so when you think of it, it does not give you cause to feel negatively. And we can do this, we can engage in this framing prospectively. It is as we can prospectively cast a positive inflection on something that we know will happen or that we have to do, or various thoughts that we think we might have. It can be as simple as, let's take the example of a cold shower. Let's say that when you think of a cold shower, the fact of a cold shower to you is something that you think of with discomfort, and it's not something that you like very much and is in that sense negatively associated. And so if you have a cold shower, all you can think about is just how uncomfortable it is and how much you wish you weren't doing that thing in that moment. But instead, if prospectively you have framed that cold shower as something that is healthy, that might be good for you, and that has positive outcomes, and that can be a reflection of your own self-discipline, well then once you get into that shower and that cold hits you, you're no longer so consumed by the negative aspect of things, but are instead focused on and being invigorated by the positive and what that shower may bring. And so gratitude works in a similar way. So something that we tend to do in terms of gratitude is fall into a state of hedonistic adaptation with things. And basically what that means is that we forget how to value things. We forget why we value things, when we forget what things we even value to begin with. And so in doing so, we lose that potential there for a recognized positive association, a positive stimulus. Now, you can break that adaptation by, let's say, telling yourself that your family members or your friends, whoever it is, might not be alive tomorrow, or you may no longer have the relationship with them that you do, or you may lose your phone or your gadgets or whatever it is that's important to you, your accessories, your luxuries. You just wake up one day and are suddenly much worse off. And by doing that in that moment, suddenly gives you pretty good cause to appreciate those things. It's like flicking a switch again. It reinvigorates just through that little mental exercise why in fact you do have cause to appreciate those things. Reasserting that, and in turn redelivering that positive emotion that is associated there. So to finish talking about happiness, there's a little quote from one of my favorite fiction authors that I'd like to deliver. The trick to happiness wasn't in freezing every momentary pleasure and clinging to each one, but ensuring one's life would produce many future moments to anticipate. So what does that mean? What that means is that we shouldn't hold on to our packages of happiness that we get too tightly, as doing so can exaggerate the loss when it fades, and even in turn hasten that fading. We should instead appreciate it when it comes and be accepting when it goes, taking comfort in the fact that it did rise and likely will again if we keep on our path. So now onto habits, and I can see we've got a bit of a spammer in the chat here. So habits are something that we can think of. We all understand, I think, we can all understand habits to some extent, at least, as an initial pattern of thought, behavior, and action that starts as a consciously enforced activity and that becomes more autonomous and more unconscious over time. We also know that habits can be good or bad, and that obviously we want ones that are good. So that there is sort of the frame of habits, but what we want more so is the picture within, and that picture I think is at least partially painted by the questions of, well, what is a good habit and why are they so important? And why are they also essential to the idea of happiness? So it might sound counterintuitive to some, although probably not to too many, but a good habit tends to be one that sacrifices something small in the moment for the successful continuation of the future that you wish to realize. And so by that I mean that you give up something today for something that pays off tomorrow and the next day and so forth. And so a few examples of this might be waking up at 7 a.m. instead of 10 a.m., or going to bed at 10 p.m. instead of 1 a.m., or eating a piece of fruit instead of an ice cream, or going to the gym as soon as you get home from work or schooling rather than sitting on the couch and turning on Netflix, or writing in a diary on a Monday night instead of playing a video game, or doing your homework, whatever needs to be done before you go out and socialize. Now, these are all just general examples of generic day-to-day behaviors and activities. But in all of these scenarios, a small level of easy and immediate gratification is sacrificed for an ultimately more sustained and fulfilling level of gratification. So why are habits so important? Well, fundamentally, habits provide substance to your goals and your identity. See, we tend to find something meaningful. So habits tend to provide substance to our goals and our identity. So much of the positive emotion that we experience in life comes from the observation that what we're doing is worthwhile. If what we're doing is meaningful, and we tend to find something meaningful if it aligns us with our goals and our values. In that sense, if what we observe ourselves as doing as being worthwhile. So what's an example of something being worthwhile? Well, let's consider the idea of a job. Let's say we have two jobs here, job A and job B. Now, just right off the bat, let's say that job A is a job that you like, but job B is a job that you don't like. Now, why is that the case? Well, let's say that when you think of job B, the thought of job B fills you with no excitement, no joy, no hope. It's not something that motivates you to necessarily get out of bed in the morning, and participating in the activities of that job is not something that fills you with much reward or purpose. And when you think of that job, of yourself in relation to that job, and in again relation to your future, what you want from your future, and what the person that you want to be in your future, there is a disconnect there between those things and that job. There is no hope in that sense. Now let's take instead job A, which is the job that you do like. Now when you think of job A, you are filled, if not so much necessarily a sense of hope, but at very least contentment or satisfaction. And when you go to perform job A, the activities of job A, it fills you with excitement, with a sense of urgency, perhaps with a sense of purpose. What you're doing with that job and the thought of that job going into the future aligns with your ideal vision of that future, or at least a good version of that future, and in turn, the person that you want to be, that you want to realize within that future. So the reason why you find that, you think of it that way, for the most part, and why it appears to be worthwhile, is because that job aligns with your goals. The goals that you've either thought of consciously or that reside a little more unconsciously, subliminally. And it is also aligned with your values, what you think of as being important for yourself, maybe for others, for whatever it is that you're doing in that job, and for maybe just society at large. So let's just go over goals a little bit briefly, because goals are very important. So we all have goals. We are fundamentally a goal-driven species. So we all have, neurologically, we all have goals, whether they be directly conceptualized or more abstract, or big or small. And we also know that goals they effectively orient our life, our direction in a sense, and how we feel across mostly larger time spans. So we also know that goals can be good and bad. And we also know that achieving a goal in the moment can often feel good and satiating. But it's a positivity that can very soon fade, leaving us feeling empty, and perhaps emptier than before we even achieved that goal. And as I mentioned earlier at the beginning, our happiness can seem to fade right when we thought we'd have the most cause to feel it. And the reason with this is because the positivity, the dopamine associated with goals and with much of our life is not so much in the destination as it is in the journey. And so that's why we do not want goals that are destination oriented. All of the reward and the purpose is in just simply achieving that goal. We do not want goals that are short-term, materialistic, or hedonistic. Those are the ones that are end-oriented. We also don't want goals that are overly large and unrealistic and that effectively just set us up for failure, stress, anxiety, despair to begin with. What we want instead are goals that are more abstract, are more fundamental, are more journey-oriented. So let's take a personal example. So a goal that I don't have is to read a certain number of books. Instead, a goal that I do have is to read. It's to be a reader, because I believe that reading has the power, that reading can give you knowledge, and that knowledge has the power to make you better off, certain knowledge, and to allow me to achieve certain things. And so just like that, I have given myself a goal that effectively never ends, that is very much journey oriented. There isn't really an end in sight, and there is no end that overshadows what you do to get to that end. And so by doing that, I've given myself a goal that I can always, in a sense, observe myself moving towards, and thus can always derive that positive emotion from. And that positivity can be stacked. The consistency with which you perform the activity that moves you towards that goal can itself be cause enough for that positive emotion, that positive association. And this can be applied to anything, whether it's writing, making music, doing something with your hands, creating things, whatever it is, any work, career, hobby-related function or activity, it doesn't matter. You just have to frame the goals in the right manner. I also think that the best goals are the ones that are long-term, that can scale out into the future, and that can also bleed into what you get from those goals can also bleed out into other things as well. They're not too niche in that sense. So what your habits do is they allow for the realization of those goals by enabling the easy repetition of the actions that facilitate those goals. And again, the more meaning you ascribe to that action, and thus the more positively correlated it is, the easier it's going to be to integrate. And soon enough, those actions that you perform as part of your habits won't be sacrifices. They'll be what you wish to be doing with your time. So beyond being instrumental to the fulfillment of goals, habits are reflective of identity, which is a very key point and one that I think isn't discussed very often and is more often than not overlooked. Completing a habit is like completing your good habit throughout the day is like handing yourself a piece of paper that says, yes, you are embodying the state of being that will take you towards that goal or that future state or that ideal self that you aspire to, that you wish to achieve. And yes, you are doing day to day what you think of as being worthwhile. And no, you are not at odds with yourself. You are not contradicting yourself. What you are doing now and what you want from your future connect. They are not at a disconnect. And you can feel good about that. And soon enough, the habit itself becomes the reward as you observe yourself moving towards a desired outcome. And at a simpler level, fulfilling your good habits throughout the day leaves room for unhabituated tasks and activities, bolstered by the previous satisfaction of the fulfilled good habit. You are free of mind and unburdened by a guilty conscience, putting you at odds with yourself. And at a simpler level, habits allow you to automate, whilst still providing enough clarity to your routine that you have motivation for other activities. So to conclude, to summarize, we've looked at some of the affecting factors of happiness and the role that goals can play in life, that habits can play in goal fulfillment and life stability. But by articulating these things, there's something else here that I'm pointing at, and that is the living of a self-examined life, an examined life. An examined life is one where we pay attention to what it is that's affecting us, what is affecting us, and in turn, how we affect everything else. Understanding what affects your happiness and the role that habits can play allows you to control them, to have some control over them, and to understand how they play out in your life. And habits and happiness are only a few of the factors that affect habits, and happiness are only a few of the variables that affect our realities, and there's plenty more to them than what I've just verbalized. Just like an athlete does to their body, we can train and develop our minds so that we are more in control of our circumstances, both mentally and physically. We just have to learn to pay attention to the right things. First and foremost being ourselves. And there, I'm done. That's all I have to say. I've gone a little bit over time, I think, but I'm sure that if your mics weren't muted, I'd be hearing raucous applause coming in right now. So, does anyone have any questions or anything that they'd like to ask or say? Whether it be in chat or over the microphone.
Hey, it's India. I got a question.
Hello, India. What's your question?
But do you think that there'd be a little bit of conflict, maybe? Or I can see there being a little bit of difficulty between, remaining present as kind of moments, appreciating those moments, while also keeping in mind that sort of future state. So you're doing something, one of these habits that is leading you down a positive road. Do you think it's hard to keep in mind both the reason you doing the habit, like the end goal, and the present sensation or whatnot, whatever.
I think
thing you're doing.
I think it can certainly be easier to let yourself get carried away with thoughts related to those goals, or not so much, not necessarily so much those goals, but just whatever it is that is weighing on you in that moment that you feel as if you have to think about and that you have to run over in your mind. So often if you just stop and think for a moment, whether it's it's something that I've noticed, for example, waking up in the morning and going to have a shower, and I'll step into that shower and I'll realize, and this doesn't have anything to do with the cold shower thing that I mentioned earlier, but stepping into that shower, just realizing that from the moment of waking up to getting there, I've been running all of these things over and over in my head, whether it's to do with my goals, things that I want, or that I want to achieve or that I think are important, assessing where I am in relation to those things, what I might have to do day to day to get towards them, in that day in particular, and maybe what I have on during the rest of that day. When really none of that in that moment is necessary, and that's it's consuming me, and it's not necessarily negative, although it can very easily get negative by meaning that you get burnt out in a sense, and that's all you can focus on, when in fact in that moment I could have very well just have been calm. Instead, me thinking about those things in that moment was going to achieve nothing, and running them over aimlessly in my mind. And again, those small spaces between things where those kinds of thoughts, those kinds of predilections towards certain thoughts don't necessarily have any benefit. And instead, you could very well just be free of mind and just thinking, oh, you know what, actually, regardless of all of these things, which may very well be true or relevant, I'm doing okay right now, and I can just enjoy this moment, enjoy this shower, and just calmly go about my day. And again, because I have those habits instantiated, I know that I am going to, throughout that day and week, hopefully at least, participate in those things that are going to take me there. And so I don't have to worry about it. I actually don't have to think about it. And that is the thing with habits. You don't have to think about it because they're already there and you're already going to do them, and they are going to be the things that take you there, so that you don't need to be constantly checking up on them, on what it is that you're doing from moment to moment. And then that's where you also, a bit of mindfulness comes into play as well, where you try to actively allocate different times. So spaces, like I said, earlier when I was talking about how we spend our time, where if you instead you coalesce your time, your productive time, into a shorter time period, that you know that you're going to get those things done in that time, that either you have to, be it through work, or that if it's a hobby that you want to allow you to get to this certain state. And then once you've achieved those things, you can reflect back on the fact that yes, you have done what you know you need to do to get to that, to at least to attempt to get to that point. And then outside of that, you can be free. You can have peace of mind in that sense. You don't have to be consumed by those things. You don't have to worry about those things. You can check in on them if you like, but you don't have to do so with the concern that you may do otherwise. So that's sort of insightful in some sense? Or is there something else you'd like me to elaborate on there?
Well, I suppose...
1 second before we do, I might just very quickly respond to what Jason said, which everyone should have a look at in the chat. And that's what he said is spot on, is that we don't need to be knee-jerked around by either our emotions, which we are very often attached to our thoughts. We don't tend to have emotion without some kind of thought attached, although we can have thought without emotion. And we do, in fact, have the ability, which is what I mentioned at the end, being self-aware, living a self-examined life and paying attention to the right things, which is what we are thinking about from moment to moment. And we do have the control, and we can teach ourselves, we can learn to get that control, to influence in some sense what we are thinking about and how we are thinking about things from moment to moment. And of course, the better your habits are, and the more aligned they are with your goals or your values, and the more instantiated they are, the less likely you're going to be either needing to feel like you're running over things constantly in your mind, and the more positively inclined you're going to be from moment to moment. The freer you're going to be in that sense. And it's obviously very easy to say these things, but it's much harder to make them a reality. But it's something that we can't ever achieve perfectly, and that's okay, but we can aim ourselves at, and we can incrementally, bit by bit, move ourselves toward. shit, I just realized that I forgot to get the recordings
Recording in
going
progress.
for these questions. Anyone else? Anything else? No? Okay.
Wait, one more.
All right. Looks like I think I've got a bit of lag coming in on my end, so I might be missing things a little bit. Go on, Finn.
What are your sustainable goals for being?
My sustainable goals or my sustainable habits?
Got your goals and your habits that you've employed with them to live them.
Well, I suppose that I have some habits that I've been working on for some time, and some that are relatively new, and some that come and go. You know, it's not always with relative varying degrees of success. You know, something that I've, you know, a habit that I've just in a general. You know, habits are very often related to, or most effectively the ones that are most effective are those that are just day to day and very routine. So a habit of mine is to try to always wake up, at least on the weekday, in the same time each morning, usually relatively early. I always have breakfast, a good breakfast. I try to always have at least half an hour to an hour in the morning. It's often not quite an hour because that can be quite difficult sometimes, to read one book or a couple books, to switch between books, and then to exercise during the afternoon, be it at lunch, during work, or after work, and then to have something that I do after that time, be it going for a swim in the beach or going for a run, or participating in something that moves me towards a goal. Say, being a writer or something, being able to write well. Maybe I will try to write something or review something that I've written or engage in some other goal-related thing, be it to some creative endeavor, whatever it is. So those are some simple habits, I suppose, that I have. And I try to, of course, be relatively healthy, and I eat meals every day that, obviously, at regular times that of decent, at least decent nutritional value, which is very important, I think, particularly in the morning. And I try to keep myself relatively constant in what I do so that I don't have to think about what it is that I'm going to do, so that I don't always have to be worrying about, which I still do sometimes, because it can be hard to make yourself do things, particularly after a full day of work. Worry about whether or not if what I'm doing, so let's say after work, is something that is hobby related or productive, that does take me to a goal that I have or something that I wish to do. But something that's important is that we have a sense of flexibility and humility as well when it comes to our goals and our habits, in that we aren't too strict on ourselves. We aren't, we allow for a little bit of wriggle room while still making sure that if we deviate a little bit, we still eventually come back on path. And sometimes we have to reevaluate those goals entirely to begin with. It's probably...
Lucian, I have a question.
Sure, Jason.
So, Lucian, what are you doing right now over the past several months as a result of COVID and whatnot? What are you doing to be happy?
As a result of COVID? Well,
yeah, I mean, I think that COVID could be is something which is affecting all of us at the moment. So I'm just wondering, has COVID affected? So
yes,
there are two questions. How do you try to be happy, and has COVID affected how you think about or how you try to be happy?
Sure. So in terms of being happy during COVID, so I made a pretty big change to my life, I suppose, in the middle of this year in July by moving from Melbourne to Byron Bay for the work that I'm doing. I decided to work with these people full time. And that was quite a large change because I moved I effectively distanced myself from my entire social group, my family, my friends, whatever. I did have a very important friend here that I came to work with, but he hasn't always been here, for example, so for the past couple of months. And as soon as I moved here in Byron, New South Wales, we went into lockdown. And so there was, beyond that, not really any chance to socialize as much anyway, and to participate in that part of my life, which is quite valuable to me. I very enjoy social engagement and interaction. And so to kind of try and retain a sense of fulfillment and gratification from moment to, day to day. I was also separated from my partner, which was itself difficult. And so what I did from day to day was I tried to, first I instantiated a regime by participating in work every single day, which was fulfilling and has been fulfilling for the most part. And then to make sure that in my time after work, I would do something that moved me. If I wasn't going to be able to socialize and participate in that sense, I would instead try to focus on maybe some goals or some hobbies that I have, whether they be writing or playing around with music or this or that. And I would use those things as supports for making my time feel valuable and to, provide that positive input and that positive stimulus that may have been to counterbalance the sort of lack of these other things. And I also, made sure to call and engage with friends, family members here and there, whether it be through playing a video game socially or whatever it is. And this was also something that I prepared for quite a while, and something that I decided that I might as well do while I was here, prepare for and develop and instantiate because obviously I thought that it'd be worth doing for other people, but obviously for myself too. And so those are some of the things, I guess, that I've been doing to keep myself positively disposed for the most part. And it's been difficult times, been quite isolated here, but those are the things that can help. You can dedicate that free time instead and try to focus on those things that do have meaning, that do have value, and that are in a sense aligned with your goals. And then make sure to be easy on yourself in a sense, and to also do things that are positive or rewarding, whether it's just like watching a Netflix or something here and there on a night, and knowing that you've done those things and that now you can just relax and enjoy yourself, and the next day will bring those other things, and that it won't necessarily last. Let's say this lack of this other thing, for example, in this being this social exclusion, isn't going to be forever, and it's only going to be temporary. And so those are some of the essence, in a sense, of some of the things that have been able to keep me on track. And I'm not sure if that answered your second question. I think I've maybe forgotten specifically the difference between your first and second question.
I was just the first question was before how did you try to be happy, and did the onset of COVID change that? That was all.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, So COVID obviously changed the fact that, COVID and me moving changed both, and starting a new job full time, but both changed my work, my social circumstances, my habits, and the nature of the landscape of my happiness, I suppose, in a sense. So yeah. Did anyone else have any other questions or anything else, or is it getting a bit late and everyone's probably wanting to go by this point? Well, that probably looks like wraps things up. Thank you all so much for deigning to come and participate and listen to me ramble on for what was probably closer to 45 minutes. And I hope that it was in some way insightful or useful, or there were little bits here and there that you could maybe draw from and apply to your own life, or maybe helped you to understand something a little better than you did previously that you already had some thoughts about and maybe thought were true, or that you hadn't thought of at all to begin with. And so, again, thank you. And I think we'll wrap up there, and you're all now free to go.